Okay, so we have been going through the book of Revelation. We've gotten all the way to chapter 20. We have gotten up to this point where the millennial reign is described in Revelation. Who can tell me how many verses are used to describe the millennial reign in the book of Revelation? Okay, how many you say? 6. Okay, and you say that because it mentions 1,000 6 times. So 1,000 years 6 times in the book of Revelation. But how much description of the millennial clock? Yeah, how much describing it? How much description of the millennial reign is there in the book of Revelation? How many verses of describing it? The answer is almost none. Okay. And it's very interesting because the millennial reign is actually discussed all throughout the Old Testament and some in the New Testament. But there's just one, the only thing the book of Revelation tells us about it is that it lasts 1,000 years. That's the big revealing about the millennial reign. So we were reading in Revelation, I'll just read one verse, chapter 20, verse 6, which is this one verse statement about the millennial reign. It said, "Blessed and holy is he that hath part in the first resurrection. On such the second death hath no power, but they shall be priests of God and of Christ, and shall reign with him 1,000 years." So no other details are given here, right? It's just that those who were alive during the first resurrection are going to reign with Christ for 1,000 years, okay? The other details come from the rest of the Bible, and we've gone through some of those passages. We're going to go through a few more of them tonight, okay? So we borrowed a lot of this from the Old Testament, and it tells us about the peace and the prosperity of the earth, the fruitfulness of the earth, the fact that wild animals are going to not be dangerous to people, the fact that wars will not happen. And where we left off last time was discussing how the kingdom is going to be organized, what the government of Jesus is going to look like, okay? So this doesn't take a whole lot of imagination. Guess who's at the top of the government? It's called the Messianic kingdom for a reason, right? It's Jesus Christ. He's the most important figure, him being the Messiah. He is the high king, all right? He will reign over the entire earth from Jerusalem. So that kingdom, okay, is actually going to be split into 2 groups. And we'll give you all the passages for this. The capital's in Israel, but there's going to be a worldwide government over the Gentile world, and there's going to be a Jewish government over the Jewish world. Jesus's throne will be the throne of David, but he still reigns over the entire earth. The Bible tells us in Isaiah chapter 9, verse 6, down through verse 7, that the entire, all nations, the entire earth will be his inheritance. So in Isaiah 9, 6, and 7, and everyone knows this from the Christmas cards, it says, "For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given." But then it says, "And the government shall be upon his shoulder." He's going to carry the whole world government. "And his name shall be called Wonderful, Counselor, the Mighty God, the Everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace. Of the increase of his government and peace, there shall be no end. Upon the throne of David and upon his kingdom, to order it and to establish it with judgment and with justice from henceforth forever. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will perform this." So his government, he's going to order his own kingdom. He's going to set it up under his rule. And no one on the entire planet is going to be able to challenge or stand against his rule or his authority. And they certainly can't stand up against his capital of Israel. In Jeremiah chapter 23, we read verse 5 through 8. It says, "Behold, the days come, saith the Lord, that I will raise unto David a righteous branch, and a king shall reign and prosper, and shall execute judgment and justice in the earth. In his days Judah shall be saved, and Israel shall dwell safely." Is that today, by the way? Do you see Israel and Judah kind of living in peace, everything going great? No, certainly not yet. "And this is the name whereby he shall be called." And let me ask you this, do the Jews call Jesus by this name? "The Lord our righteousness." Certainly, again, not yet. "Therefore, behold, the days come, saith the Lord, that they shall no more say, The Lord liveth, which brought up the children of Israel out of the land of Egypt." Now, again, just to pause here, remember that all throughout the Old Testament, the claim of God's authority over Israel was that he brought them out of Egypt. And that was the big deal. He said it over and over as you go through the books of Moses. He's like, I, the Lord God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt. He's saying that the day will come when Israel coming out of Egypt doesn't mean a thing. What will they say instead? But the Lord liveth, which brought up and which led the seed of the house of Israel out of the north country, and from all the countries whither I had driven them, and they shall dwell in their own land. They will recognize that the nation of Israel that is restored from the remnant will all know that it is God who brought them back and brought them back into their own land, not out of Egypt. That'll be a thing of the past. Then you get to Psalm 72, and it describes how all the different kingdoms of the world will come and worship Jesus and will come and serve him in Israel. Now, a lot of people, whenever I say Jesus is coming to rule the earth, it is very hard for the Christian to understand what that means. Because every time we think of Jesus, what do we think? The sheep's gone astray. He's gone and he's brought it back, right? He's loving, he's kind, he's gentle. Isn't that the image you get of where everything's going to be nice and peaceful and sweet? Well, he is going to have peace around the world. But if you are an oppressor or you are unrighteous, you refuse to submit to his lordship, you refuse to submit to him, again, at least by 100 years old, or you're an unrighteous person, he rules with a rod of iron. That is not a good image. If I told you I'm coming to your house and I'm bringing an iron rod, you're going to be like, wait, what are you coming to do? Tell me what you're coming for. That's how he describes himself ruling. In Psalm 72, I'll read verse 4-9, says, he shall judge the poor of the people. He shall save the children of the needy. He shall break in pieces the oppressor. They shall fear thee as long as the sun and moon endure throughout all generations. He shall come down like rain upon the mown grass, as showers that water the earth. In his day shall the righteous flourish, and abundance of peace so long as the moon endureth. He shall have dominion also from sea to sea, and from river unto the ends of the earth. They that dwell in the wilderness shall bow before him, and his enemies shall lick the dust. It is a wonderful thing to be a willing servant of Jesus Christ. It is a terrifying thing to stand as his enemy when he reigns on the earth. And Isaiah 11 goes on about his righteous reign. And I'll just read one verse. Verse 4 says, but with righteousness shall he judge the poor and reprove with equity for the meek of the earth. He shall smite the earth with the rod of his mouth, and with the breath of his lips shall he slay the wicked. When he pronounces judgment on the wicked during his reign, that's it. They're done. It's over. They're cut off. Okay. So that's the king. All right. Yes, sir.
What were the verses of Psalm 72?
That was verse 4 down through verse 9. And then Isaiah was 11, verse 4. Okay. So that's Jesus ruling as the king. So now we're going to look at the Gentile branch of his government. Okay. There's a Gentile branch and there's a Jewish branch. The Gentile branch is overruled by the church and the tribulation saints. So this comes from earlier in chapter 20 of Revelation. In verse 4, he says, John is speaking, he says, and I saw thrones and they that sat upon them. So he saw these thrones and those who were sitting on them, and judgment was given unto them. And I saw the souls of them that were beheaded for the witness of Jesus and for the word of God, which had not worshipped the beast, neither his image, neither had received his mark upon their foreheads or in their hands, and they lived and reigned with Christ 1,000 years. So judgment over the Gentile world is given to those seated on thrones and those killed during the tribulation. Those are the two groups who are going to reign over the Gentile world. Now, from earlier in Revelation, we know who it was that were seated on thrones. That comes from Revelation chapter 4, verse 4, says, and round about the throne of God were 24 seats, and upon the seats I saw 24 elders sitting, clothed in white raiment, and they had on their heads crowns of gold. So this bride of Christ, represented by these 24 elders, along with the tribulation saints, are given a royal ruling position on the earth. That is the expectation of the church. That was promised throughout the New Testament. Here's a couple references. 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 2. Paul asks the Corinthians, do you not know that the saints shall judge the world? And again, when we say judge, don't think about a person judging, a crime. That means ruling over the world, right? And if the world shall be judged by you, are you unworthy to judge the smallest matters? He's like, stop fighting in the church. You guys are going to have to reign over the world. Revelation chapter 2, verse 26, in a promise to the overcomer, he says, and he that overcometh and keepeth my works unto the end, to him will I give power over the nations, authority over the nations, and he shall rule them with a rod of iron. As the vessels of a potter shall they be broken to shivers, even as I received of my Father. So with the authority of Jesus, you will represent him to the Gentile world, okay? The bride of Christ and the tribulation saints, maybe the tribulation saints, but definitely the bride of Christ, will easily be identified during the millennial reign, mainly because we will have a different nature than the rest of the world. While again, I can't tell you for sure about the tribulation saints because the Bible doesn't tell us, but we know the church, without a doubt, is going to be set apart because we will have superhuman bodies. We will be glorified, right? Just like he is. That comes from multiple references in the Bible. I'll give you a couple. 1 John chapter 3, verse 2 says, beloved, now are we the sons of God, and it doth not yet appear what we shall be, but we know that when he shall appear, when he comes to rapture us, we shall be like him, for we shall see him as he is. Same idea given in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 52 to 54, again describing the rapture. In the moment, in a twinkling of an eye, at the last trump, for the trumpet shall sound, and the dead shall be raised incorruptible, so the dead will come up and be glorified, and we shall be changed. For this corruptible, talking about our own bodies, must put on incorruption, and this mortal must put on immortality. We will be glorified. When? At the rapture. So when this corruptible shall put on incorruption, and this mortal shall have put on immortality, then shall be brought to pass the saying that is written, death is swallowed up in victory. Once we have a body, physical, that cannot die, death is over. It can't touch us. Can death affect this body right now? You betcha. So we're not there yet, but there is a time coming. And once the church is raptured, the day that it's raptured, you will see glorified humans in heaven. And that's why we go back to Revelation 4 and see these 24 elders representing that. So when they come back to earth, they will be glorified. So that doesn't mean, as I used to think as a child, I used to be like, well, if I'm going to rule, I guess I'll take New York City, why not? But that's not what that means, right? The church does not appear to directly rule over the Gentile nations, but it's that you have a royal status, the authority of the king. Everyone knows that you're directly connected to Christ, right? So they're respected and honored across the planet. And when you say a judgment, it happens, right? You're not subject to the nations, but the nations are subject to you. And you'll have the authority of Jesus Christ. The kings of the nations will continue to exist exclusive of us. They're not part of the church. So in Psalm 72, verse 10 and 11, it gives us a quick example of that. Again, we read a little bit from Psalm 72 earlier. It says, the kings of Tarshish, which people think is like England, the kings of Tarshish and of the isles of the Gentiles, shall bring presents. The kings of Sheba and Seba shall offer gifts. Yea, all kings shall fall down before him, and all nations shall serve him. So we know they're not of the church, right? Because no one in the church is ever going to be foolish enough to not worship Christ. Anyone who has been born again submits willingly to Jesus Christ. And we know that some of these kings during the millennium will refuse to come and worship Jesus. So that comes from Zechariah chapter 14, verse 16 and 17. And based on what we know about their first 100 years, they're probably refusing to worship him in those first 100 years of life in their foolish youth, okay? And so Zechariah 14, verse 16 and 17 says, and it shall come to pass that everyone that is left of all the nations which came against Jerusalem, so these are the people who survived the tribulation, shall even go up from year to year to worship the King, the Lord of hosts, and to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. And it shall be that whoso will not come up of all the families on the earth unto Jerusalem to worship the King, the Lord of hosts, even upon them there shall be no rain. There will be some people who refuse to worship God during the millennium, and as such, there will be droughts and death in their countries. So in summary of this Gentile part of the world, you're going to have the Gentile people, all the nations of the earth, and they're going to be under the rule of the Gentile kings, just like we see countries today under their leadership. And then there's going to be a royal class of the church and the tribulation saints who have authority over these and essentially rule over them in the world. And ultimately, the church, of course, submits to Christ. And that's how that Gentile part is set up. Any questions so far on what we've talked about?
Verses in 1 Corinthians 15.
So 1 Corinthians 15, verse 52 and through 54. Those are the verses specifically dealing with the rapture. Anything else? Okay, so now we'll turn our attention to the organization of the nation of Israel during this time. Now, again, I've said this before, but remember, when we talk about Israel today, that small little strip of land we call Israel, that's actually split between Palestine and Israel, that's not biblical Israel. Biblical Israel is much bigger and takes up a significant portion of the Middle East, okay? So, by default, if you are a Jewish person that survived the tribulation, remember, 1 and 3, the remnant of Israel, who have now been restored, in addition to resurrected Israel. Remember, the righteous of Israel have been resurrected to live in the millennial kingdom. That's from the Old Testament. And theoretically, we assume all the righteous from the Old Testament will also accept Christ as their Savior, because we find that all of Israel during the millennium will be saved. So being a Jew during that time gives you a special privilege and position. It'll be a privileged citizenship as citizens of the capital of the planet, okay? So Deuteronomy chapter 15, verse 6, talking about the future blessings God's going to give the nation Israel as this nation is being formed. He says in Deuteronomy 15, 6, for the Lord thy God blesseth thee as he promised thee. So he's going to fulfill his promises. And thou shalt lend unto many nations, but thou shalt not borrow. Thou shalt reign over many nations, but they shall not reign over thee. Right? Today, we enjoy that as Americans. At least we did over the last 100 years. If you go somewhere and you're an American, oh, wow, it's an American. Americans have this, high status. Now, that's that image is changing in the world a little bit today. But that's what it was before America. That was what it meant to be a British person. You could go anywhere in the world. And because you're a British, you had very special rights and privileges. Remember back in biblical times, being a Roman. Remember Paul, he used that. I'm a Roman citizen. Oh, you have special rights and privileges. One day that will fall to Israel because the king of the world will be a Jew, right? That's Jesus Christ. So that's the citizens of Israel. And in regards to the nation, those citizens are under the authority of judges and counselors, okay? So in Isaiah chapter 1, this is verse 24 down to 27, it says, therefore thus saith the Lord of hosts, the mighty one of Israel, ah, I will ease me of mine adversaries and avenge of mine enemies. And I will turn my hand upon thee and purely, talking to Israel, purely purge away thy dross and take away all thy tin. Specifically, he's referring to Jerusalem, right? He says, I will restore thy judges as at the first, and thy counselors as at the beginning. Afterward, thou shalt be called the city of righteousness, the faithful city. Zion shall be redeemed with judgments, and her converts with righteousness. So the city of Israel right now, the city of Jerusalem specifically, it's not a wonderful place to be. It's a divided city, right? A lot of hostility in that city. But one day it's going to be called the city of righteousness. The judges and counselors, they will then report to the princes of Israel, the princes of the land. So in Isaiah 32, verse 1, says, behold, a king shall reign in righteousness, and princes, plural, shall rule in judgment. So in Ezekiel 45, verse 8 says, in the land shall be his possession in Israel, and my princes shall no more oppress my people, and the rest of the land shall they give to the house of Israel according to their tribes. So Israel will be divided, and the Jews will be under the judges and counselors, who will be under the princes. The princes of the land, in turn, will submit to who? The 12 apostles. Okay. So in Matthew chapter 19, verse 28, it says, and Jesus said unto them, verily I say unto you, that ye which have followed me, in the regeneration, when the Son of Man shall sit on the throne in his glory, you also shall sit upon 12 thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel. So they're going to judge over the 12 tribes. Again, in Luke 22, verse 28, says, ye are they which have continued with me in my temptations. Verse 29 and 30 say, and I appoint unto you a kingdom, as my Father hath appointed unto me, that you may eat and drink at my table in my kingdom, and sit on thrones judging the 12 tribes of Israel. Now, has anyone here ever heard of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table? Now, there's all kinds of sources about how many knights there were. One of the ancient sources says there's about 13, right? So there's King Arthur and his 12 Knights of the Round Table. So in a similar idea, because they were all on that table, the idea was they were all equals on that table, right? Because that's why it was a round table, not one with a head and a foot. Now, that's a work of fiction, obviously. But the idea here is that these 12 apostles will actually rule under not just Jesus, but King David. Okay, so not King Arthur, but King David. So there is a lot of discussion in Christian circles, by the way, over whether Paul is the 12th apostle that took Judas' spot, or whether it was Matthias. The answer is, I don't know. And it doesn't really matter, right? Whoever it may be, we'll see who's ruling during the millennium, okay? But some people say, well, is King David actually King David? Or is it just another title for Jesus, right? Well, I believe it's actually King David. And here's some of the passages why I believe that God will rule on earth as Jesus Christ, and King David will also rule on earth, the resurrected King David, because we already know he's going to be resurrected. Daniel chapter 12, verse 2 told us that, and we'll come back to that verse in a minute. But in Ezekiel chapter 37, verse 24 through 28 says, and David my servant shall be king over them, and they all shall have one shepherd, and they shall also walk in my judgments and observe my statutes and do them. And they shall dwell in the land that I have given unto Jacob my servant, wherein your fathers have dwelt. And they shall dwell therein, even they and their children and their children's children forever. And my servant David shall be their prince forever. Okay, so far we see David's there. Let's continue. Moreover, so in addition to this, moreover, I will make a covenant of peace with them. It shall be an everlasting covenant with them, and I will place them and multiply them, and will set my sanctuary in the midst of them forevermore. So in addition to David ruling them, the dwelling place of God will be with them. My tabernacle also shall be with them. Yea, I will be their God, and they shall be my people. And the heathen shall know that I, the Lord, do sanctify Israel, when my sanctuary shall be in the midst of them forevermore. So he goes through, David's going to rule, David's going to reign. Oh yeah, and me too. Okay. Then we go on to, so in addition to this tabernacle of David, so other passages again verify this. So in Ezekiel 34, verse 23, he says, I will set up one shepherd over them, and he shall feed them, even my servant David. He shall feed them, and he shall be their shepherd. And I, the Lord, will be their God, and my servant David will be a prince among them. I, the Lord, have spoken it. Jesus is coming as king, but the Lord will be their king. But David will be a prince under the Lord. Jeremiah chapter 30, verse 9. But they shall serve the Lord their God and David their king. You see the differentiation there, right? Whom I will raise up unto them. And lastly, Hosea chapter 3, verse 5. It says, afterward shall the children of Israel return and seek the Lord their God and David their king, and shall fear the Lord and his goodness in the latter days. So that's how we see the organization of the Israeli part of the Messianic kingdom. The citizens hold a special status under the judges and the counselors, under the princes, under the 12 apostles, under King David, under Jesus Christ. And with that, we'll take a 5-minute break unless you guys have any final questions or comments on the organization of the Messianic kingdom. All right, let's go ahead and take a break then.